So 2,500 years ago, the Greeks made decisions with something that they called democracy. And I'd argue that that was the first and last time that humankind had democracy. It wasn't perfect. Women and slaves weren't involved, but there was a massive level of genuine participation, and the poorest and least educated people were really engaged at the highest levels. The Greeks referred to voting as being not democracy but oligarchy, so in the interests of the few. And when the Romans came along, who came next, they put voting right in the middle of their system, because they understood that if you wanted to keep power with the elite, that's what you needed to do. And then, of course, it's no coincidence that some years later, Western democracies, including ours, of course, used the Roman system, not the Greek. And then we exported it to our colonies, including America, who ensured that their constitution can never accidentally allow anyone but the powerful to be in power. Roll forward a bit and come to 2019, and we find ourselves with a government that's a complete farce in the sense of its incapability to make decisions, certainly to make complex decisions, the ones that we need at the moment to deal with things like Brexit, but also with climate change. And that's because the way that they make decisions and the whole focus of their work is on ensuring that the short-term needs of the elites are being met. So many of the tools that we offer and discuss in the Future Democracy Hub require a compliant and constructive government to be fully adopted at the highest level. And we don't have that functioning or compliant or listening government. But there is a level of decision making where we can change these things using the tools that we're talking about, and acting in the hope and belief that our success will push the dysfunctional ones to one side. And that's the local level, and that's where Flatpackery comes in. Flatpackery is a name that came from a book that I wrote 5 years ago on the art of creating on creating independent politics, taking over at a local level. But that's what a group of us did in Frome, in the parish council in 2011. And in many places, and in many ways, it's horrifically easy to do that. The competition is often non-existent. In Dorset earlier this year, there were 163 parishes, but there were only 33 had elections. And that's pretty much mirrored throughout the country. So at this level, it's something which is really quite easy. And what we did in Frome was what we offered was a way of doing things where there were no party politics. There was an agreement about how we as a group would work together. And there was a commitment to increasing participation and true engagement. So we had no manifesto. What we promised to do instead was to listen to people and bring in expertise and then make decisions. 9 years later, there's been a whole load of successes and lots of learning, both in Frome and in other places which have taken elements of the model. Because there's now around 20 towns that I know of, there may be many more, which have totally taken over in the way I'm talking about. And then there's a further 100 that I know of who've done so partially. And the learning from all of that and from them has been written up in a second book, Flatpack 2.0. So at its best, this is future democracy in action, with genuine participation at its core. And also crucial to our conversation, or this bit of conversation, is two links to climate change. The first is that Frome and many others have been very early in declaring climate and ecological emergencies, backed up with plans for fundamental change. And the second is that I would argue that if you've got a functional, really well-working local council working with the local community, then there's much more chance of being creative and resilient in facing what's to come. So that means, maybe taking opportunities as they emerge, but it also may be facing the threats that come with a more challenging world. So what taking over your council offers is key resources of money and staff. There's lots of brilliant things happening like transition towns already, but they can be really ramped up to do stuff in different and much more ambitious ways if there's a council that's working with them as opposed to against them or not doing anything much. So perhaps it didn't matter before if councils just did chains and twinning, but it certainly does matter now, because what austerity has done is meant that if we don't do it, no one else is going to. We've really got to be doing things at this local level if they're going to happen at all. Secondly, that climate change has to involve all of us, and it really has to come from these community levels and then work its way up. And thirdly, the agenda of government and parliament is simply not the agenda of most of us. So the resources that can help you if you're interested in this kind of approach and in Flatpackery are really the two books, which are a mixture of manual and story, backed up with a private group that I run with around 200 people who either are or want to be local councillors. And then there's potential for webinars and group training and discussions, which I'm really up for doing. So the best place to buy the books or to contact me is the Flatpack Democracy website. And what I would say, finally, is that becoming a town or parish councillor can sound like the most boring thing in the world. But it's actually a place where I found you can reinvent things, and it can become a tool for real change and to reclaim politics, and in the process perhaps create the first democracy we've had since the Greeks. Thanks.